joining me live is the Shadow Federal Health and Aged Care Minister, Anne Ruston from Adelaide. And Ruston, thank you for your time. So we've got to start to the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Can I start with a reaction to that? The start of the NAC?
Well, I mean, obviously it's something that, is a really important institution to make sure that, we Australians maintain confidence in the integrity of our institution. So obviously we welcome it starting today.
Do you see many politicians ultimately being subject to findings here?
Well, I mean, obviously that's a matter for the independence of the body. That's the most important thing, is that we need to recognise and respect the independence. But I mean, it's clearly an authority that's got a fair bit of power, and along with that power goes a fair bit of responsibility. So I think it's an important institution, but it has to be respected for its independence, and I'm not going to pass any judgment.
Do you think Stuart Robert has issues of concern with the Commission?
Well, look, if anybody has got any issues at all in relation to, any matters or any people, then it's up to those people to refer those matters to the Commission, and the Commission obviously, through its its threshold and its independence, will make a determination as to what they do with the information that they receive. It's not for me to be making comments on individuals.
Do you have any fears about the new body?
Well, as I said, I think it's a very powerful body, and with that power goes a huge amount of responsibility. And I think the most important thing is that its independence is respected, its independence is maintained, because obviously nobody accepts corrupt behaviour, and we need to make sure that where there is corrupt behaviour, there's a mechanism appropriately to call that out. But that mechanism must be independent, and I'd like to think that the new National Anti-Corruption Commission will be that body.
I wanted to ask you about the launch of the Yes 23 campaign yesterday. What do you think of the voice and of the campaign that's being run for it?
Well, I mean, I think I've been fairly clear in my concerns about the lack of information that's been provided to Australians around what the constitutionally enshrined voice is likely to mean for Australians. And when we can't get people who are experts in the Constitution, we can't get the legal fraternity, we can't even get Indigenous Australians to agree on what this actually is and what it's going to look like going forward. So, it's concerning, but what I'd say is that every single Australian, individually, one by one, will walk into that ballot box and cast their vote. Don't be influenced by, the pressure that's put on you by others. Go and find out for yourself the information that you need to know about both the yes and the no cases, and then go and make your own informed decision. Because I'd suggest that, corporate Australia and also some of the big sporting bodies, I'm sure they haven't asked, their shareholders or their players as to what their views are. This is corporate Australia and big sport in Australia and the capital cities making a statement. But I'd say to every Australian, make your own mind up.
And just on that, your leader had some choice comments yesterday about corporates donating to The Voice, he's almost saying they're almost being shamed into it or being gutless. Do you back that in?
Well, look, I certainly think that, there is an informed choice to be made here. And corporate Australia just going out and picking one side without clearly understanding the details, because I mean, no Australian understands the details of this voice because they simply aren't there, despite having been asked the government 1 million times to provide more detail. So corporate Australia going out and throwing money at one side of an argument when there's no information, I probably would say, as I said before, Australians should actually be going in and informing themselves and not being told what to do by people who live in big cities.
Just in your portfolio of health, pharmacists have started a campaign against the government's 60-day dispensing rules. Do you think they have any hopes of overturning the government's position on this or coming to a negotiation?
Well, I'd be saying to the Albanese Labor government and to Mark Butler as the Minister, get back to the table. I mean, nobody could deny that getting Australians more affordable and easier access to medicines is a good thing. But what this government has done is, without consultation, without any modelling, without considering the secondary consequences, have actually forced the cost of this measure, this cost of living relief measure that they're claiming so much credit for, they're actually making your community pharmacy pay for it. And so right now I'd be saying to the government, get back to the table, negotiate in good faith. You've got the community pharmacy agreement that's in place that you really have trashed by this action. Get back to the table so we can make sure we have the best of both worlds, Australians getting access to cheaper medicine, but also community pharmacy not being compromised, their viability being compromised by an action of the government that they haven't even bothered to consult on.
The PM keeps seeming to duck to what he promised in terms of a COVID inquiry or Royal Commission. Do you support such an inquiry, and is it time for one?
Well, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of investigation into COVID, but, you know, it's once again a case of the Prime Minister went to the election with a whole heap of promises that he made to Australians, and I think Australians have got every right to be expecting this government and this Prime Minister to actually deliver on their promises, whether it be this particular one or a myriad of other promises that he seems to have completely forgotten about now.
Well, speaking of which, aged care, you are making a thing of that, I suppose. The deadline for the government's promise for all aged care homes to have a nurse on 24/7 was on last Saturday. That's obviously not been met. Do you see the promise as some sort of con? Do you think the government will, in a year's time, deliver on it?
Well, obviously right now the biggest challenge facing our care sector across the board is access to workforce. And, you know, it doesn't matter how much this government wants to legislate. You know, simply their workforce just isn't there. We know that, you know, we're some 8,000 registered nurses short right now just to deliver on the commitments that are before us today. So, you know, obviously we want the best possible care, and we'd love to see 24/7 nurses in all of our aged care facilities. But, you know, you simply can't deliver that if you don't have the workforce. And what we'd be saying is, you know, stop with putting so much stress and pressure and anxiety onto our aged care sector. Let them actually do the best possible job they can to look after our older Australians, and let's work with the sector to try and see if we can work through resolving the challenges that are before us so we can get on with delivering the care that I think every Australian wants for older Australians when they are in a position where they have to go into residential care.
And we have the Fadden by-election on in a couple of weeks. What's an acceptable result for the Liberal Party in this by-election?
Well, obviously you never take any election for granted, and certainly by-elections can be tricky at the best of times, but I think we've pre-selected a great candidate. He's a local member of the community, he's out on the ground working really hard, and we'd hope that you know, Australians would be noticing by now that for all the promises of the Albanese Labor government when they went to the election last year, I don't think there'd be an Australian who could stand here today and say that they thought that they were better off than they were 12 months ago. And so we hope that the people of Haddon will see that, because we've got a great candidate, and I think it's a real opportunity for them to send a message to the Albanese Labor government that for all their promises, life is not better under Mr Albanese.
What if there isn't a swing to you? That'll spell real trouble for the next federal election, wouldn't it, if that were to occur?
Well, as I said, you never take a by-election for granted. You never take any election for granted. There's always you know, it's challenging. You're not going to change the government by the result of the election. But as I said, we've got a great candidate. He's working really, really hard. He's a local member of the community, served on his local council. And I think, you know, he provides a really great and strong candidate for the people of Fadden to vote for. So obviously we're hopeful that the people of Fadden will see, you know, what a great candidate we've got, but also the fact that you know, this government has not delivered on the promise of making life better for Australians. In fact, every Australian's life is worse.